Good evening. Welcome to session 3 of our Equip series. My name is Eric Miller, and I'm one of the leaders here at Redemption Church. Tonight we're going to talk about hospitality, or as I'm calling it, the doorway to the gospel. I'd like to structure our time like so. We're going to talk about what hospitality was in biblical times, what it is not, and then what it is. We'll then find out hospitality's connection to the gospel, and then we'll close our time out with some simple practical steps that you can leverage this area of your life for the gospel. So first, let's talk about what hospitality was. I was quite surprised to find out that there is actually no word in Hebrew for the practice of hospitality. But to me, that's sort of like God in the book of Esther, because God is never mentioned by direct reference a single time in the book of Esther, but his presence and sovereign working are threaded throughout that entire amazing story. The first thing that seems to be very important about hospitality in the Old Testament, and as we're going to see even in the New Testament, is that hospitality was an act primarily aimed at the foreigner and the stranger, not at your fellow Israelite. One article that I read enumerated certain characteristics of Jewish hospitality. There was a greeting, usually accompanied by a kiss, so Carter and Jacob, get ready. There was an invitation to come in and rest from your travels and wash up. There was a provision of food and drink, and significantly, I believe, an invitation to conversation. And then there was the provision, obviously, of security. So hospitality was all about making someone feel seen, making them feel at home, including the stranger as family, engaging with them so that they didn't feel like a stranger any longer. You were telling them, you are safe here. And this was huge because in those times, strangers were not just your neighbor or some nearby local that you simply hadn't met yet. They were travelers. They were nomads, people far from home or anywhere where they could settle down and relax. So to give them this gift of hominess was invaluable. But why was so much emphasis put on Israel in caring for the stranger and the traveler? And the answer is because Israel used to be the strangers in a strange land. Leviticus 19:33 and 34 says, "And if a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." And this idea is repeated over and over through the Old Testament. Exodus 20, Exodus 23, Deuteronomy 10 and 24, and on and on and on. So hospitality reflected an empathetic connection. I know how you feel. And that can be a very powerful connection. I lost a senior back in the 5th year of my teaching. The dad's name was Daryl, and he had had a hard time dealing with his grief over losing his son. His wife told me a story about how they, their daughter, and another couple were in a joint Sunday school class together. The leader of the class asked the question, "What is a time that you have been very fearful?" The other father recounted how they had lost their oldest child to cancer back when he was a teenager. That story emboldened Daryl to speak of the loss of their son for the very first time publicly. And the wife told me that when they were both finished, they just kind of made eye contact with a knowing head nod toward each other. And in that moment, there was something that they both knew, that they understood, that no one else in the room did. What it's like for a father to lose his son. They really knew how each other felt. The Israelites knew how it felt to be strangers in a strange land, to be displaced, to be uncomfortable, scared, to not be able to be at ease, to not feel at home. And that was the fuel for their hospitality. In the New Testament, there is actually a Greek word that is translated hospitality, and interestingly, it means the love of strangers. So specifically, it's referring to those outside of your normal circle of friends. So does this mean that you stop entertaining Redemption Church members or that the Millers stop having game nights? No way, that's not going to happen. These moments of fellowship with those with whom we share this common salvation are a matter of maintaining unity in the body of Christ. But biblical hospitality is not about that body unity. It's about evangelism. reaching out to love, serve, and give the gospel to those outside of the body of Christ. So the New Testament idea of hospitality, just like in the Old, starts outside your front door, not behind it. Who we might identify with or who we're comfortable around does not define who we show hospitality to. Quite the contrary. For instance, as in the Good Samaritan account, true biblical hospitality is defined by showing kindness to those on the outside of our comfortable circles. So New Testament hospitality doesn't actually begin until we're dealing with people outside of our normal circle of friends. And to connect our New Testament context with the Old Testament idea, Jesus followers should know what it feels like to be out of place, to feel disconnected from our culture, and to feel isolated, to be strangers in a strange land, so to speak. So our call to hospitality, just like in the Old Testament, is because we know what it's like to be strangers in the world, to not feel like we belong, because we don't. Now let's shift and talk about what hospitality is not. First of all, hospitality is not purely a location. In other words, your house. Now, while your home is very significant, because if biblical hospitality is about making people feel at home and feel included as a family, that is best accomplished at home, but not exclusively so. I like the way my wife Jeanette put it. She said, hospitality is bigger than my home. It's a willingness to let people in. Second, hospitality is not purely an action. Getting together as a group or having people over or taking them out and feeding them are all great, and more commonly what we think of when we think of hospitality. But you don't have to do much of anything to just make people feel comfortable and to make them feel included and safe around you. It can be done in any setting, anywhere, just by the way you relate to them. Next, hospitality is not simply a social event, because these people are not guests that you're trying to entertain and impress with your decor and your fine china and your perfect atmosphere. And you don't want to make them feel that way. If you're doing it as intended, it has the feel of a family gathering and they're just there to be loved on. Corelle dishes, plastic forks, solo cups and all. That was for Jacob. Also, hospitality is not purely towards lower socioeconomic groups or someone that you might feel a station above. It's not always something that flows downhill in that way. I think we often probably naturally feel drawn towards looking for people with obvious external needs to be hospitable towards, and that's probably natural. But remember, hospitality is not about meeting some external need. It's about meeting the spiritual gospel need that they have on the inside. We're going to talk more about that later. And lastly, and I feel it's very obvious, hospitality is not just a checkbox to satisfy an obligation or be seen. If you're doing it just because you're being told currently at this very moment in real time by me that you should, or that you must to be a good, acceptable Christian, then you have no chance of actually impacting people because of my next point. They're going to see through that just like glass. So what is hospitality? The first point I want to make, and the one that I was referring to a few seconds ago, is that more than anything, hospitality is a posture of your heart. This is where Jeanette's and my experience began. We would often look around at the house we had bought in Madison, North Carolina, with its finished basement, its extra bedrooms, yard, and especially the swimming pool. And we would just be quite frankly overwhelmed, even ashamed that it was ours. We just genuinely could not believe that this was a house that people should live in who had conducted their finances and their lives the way we had for 20 years. And yet there we were. It was very humbling. We dedicated ourselves in that house to use it for God from that point forward. And we tried to, from hosting college groups or staff parties, to temporarily housing people, from family to friends to complete strangers. We tried to let our house reflect what God was doing in our hearts. Building off of that point, hospitality is about an open home that provides protection and shelter and food, exactly like the Old Testament concept of hospitality that we talked about earlier. We have scolded our young community group members before many times for bothering to knock. You just walk in at the Miller home. And hospitality is about inclusion, visibility, and acceptance. It says, you are one of us. You are part of our tribe. We see you. A note on this. As long as we struggle with our own hangups and discomfort over people that look or act or believe differently than us, and we can't be at ease around them, they're not going to feel welcome or accepted or feel at ease around us no matter what we do. And more significantly, they're not going to feel at ease around our gospel. Hospitality is also about genuineness. No strings attached. Not even the gospel. Pause for dramatic effect. Now don't check out right here. You're going to have to let me explain, because yes, I am saying that the gospel, or more to the point, you're witnessing to them, cannot be an ulterior motive to your hospitality. Any hint that your kindness and generosity are just the tall weeds that you're hiding behind, waiting to pounce on your prey with your 4 spiritual laws, is going to wreck your audience with the person. They're not our project. They're a person. We are not the workman. God is the workman. We are his work, and this person is his work. They're not ours to fix. They're ours to love. There's a woman named Rosaria Butterfield who has written a book that everyone on our team has read. Wink, wink. The Gospel Comes with a House Key. In her original book, The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert, Butterfield, who is a radical lesbian feminist, a Syracuse tenured professor of critical theory, specifically queer theory, which is her term to refer to a sort of a postmodern form of gay and lesbian studies, and who had very definite preconceptions about what Christians were like. In her book, she recounts her introduction to the first genuine Christian couple that she ever met and their impact on her. We're going to read an excerpt about what she had to say about this couple in a bit. Now, the gospel is, of course, always ultimately the goal, but my point is that it is unconditional, genuine love that identifies us to the unbeliever as someone who is different, someone who is real. And it's when they feel that love that they will seek our input about other personal things, including their bigger questions about life and God. Now, all of these characteristics have something in common. They're all characteristics of family. We love family. Family is included. Our family is visible to us. We accept them. We kind of have to, whether we like it or not. This kind of goes along with the deal. Hospitality is simply making people feel like family. So how does the hospitality fit into the gospel? Well, as my title implies, I believe that hospitality is the doorway to the gospel. Biblical hospitality in the Old Testament did not have anything to do with conversion. It was not about them trying to proselytize Gentiles into being part of Israel, though that was available to them. It wasn't the purpose. It was about Israelites living in gratitude towards God, who had delivered them from Egypt and made them a people. In the New Testament, however, it is about the gospel. Everything is about the gospel, because as my wife Jeanette's coffee mug says, the gospel changes everything. Hospitality is indeed a reflection of our gratitude to God for what he's done for us, that he delivered us from sin and made us the church. And our desire to share that with others is the driving force behind our hospitality. I like Romans 12:16, which says, "Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble." And the word translated associate there means to share in or to engage continuously in some activity. The famous Lowe and Nida commentary says that the word may also be understood as meaning to involve oneself with. So this verse is actually saying, do not be proud, but become involved with humble people. Or simply put, make friends with humble people. As we've said, and I go back to my wife's comment, hospitality is ultimately about people and letting them into your life, not a place. Christ had no home in which to host people, but he showed hospitality to them all the time by relating to them, making them feel seen and understood. He involved himself with humble people. Every person who left an interaction with Jesus, the woman at the well, the adulterous woman, Nicodemus, even the rich young ruler, left feeling that they had been seen, that they were known, like it or not. I'd like to read an excerpt from Mrs. Butterfield's book now about her first interaction with this couple because it speaks to these last couple of points so powerfully. The most memorable part of this meal was Ken's prayer before the meal. I had never heard anyone pray to God as if God cared, as if God listened, as if God answered. It was not a pretentious prayer uttered for the heathen at the table to overhear. It was a private and honest utterance, and I felt as though I was treading on something real, something sincere, something important, and something transparent but illegible to me. Ken made himself vulnerable to me in his prayer by humbling himself before this God of his, and I took note of that. During our meal, I remember holding my breath and waiting to be punched in the stomach with something grossly inappropriate or inoffensive. But our conversation was lively and fun. If Floy, his wife, was a submissive wife, she was also gifted, smart, perceptive, very well read, and a great cook. If Ken was the Bible-thumping pastor, he was also a good listener, a balanced interpreter, a lover of good poetry, a reader of culture and politics, and a husband who clearly adored, relied upon, and valued highly his wife's counsel. These people simply did not fit the stereotype, and I simply didn't know what to do with them. Ken and Floyd did something at the meal that has a long Christian history, but has been functionally lost in too many Christian homes. Ken and Floyd invited the stranger in, not to scapegoat me, but to listen and to learn and to dialogue. Ken and Floyd have a vulnerable and transparent faith. We didn't debate worldview. We talked about our personal truth and what made us tick. I underlined this. Ken and Floyd didn't identify with me. They listened to me, and they identified with Christ. They were willing to walk the long journey towards me in Christian compassion. During our meal, they did not share the gospel with me. After our meal, they did not invite me to church. And it was because of these glaring omissions to the Christian script as I had come to know it, that when the evening ended and Pastor Ken said he wanted to stay in touch, I knew that it was truly safe to accept his open hand. Before I ever set foot in a church, I spent 2 years meeting with Ken and Floyd and off and on studying the Bible and my own heart. If Ken and Floyd had invited me to church at that first meal, I would have careened like a skateboard off a cliff, and I would have never come back. Ken, of course, knows the power of the word preached, but it seems to me he also knew at that time that I could not come to church. It would have been too threatening. It would have been too weird. It would have been too much. So Ken was willing to bring the church to me. This gave me the room and the safety that I needed to match Ken and Floyd's vulnerability and transparency. And so I opened up to them. I let them know who I was and what I valued. I invited them into my home and into my world. They met my friends, came to my dinner parties. They saw me function in my real life. They made themselves safe enough for me to do this. So of course, the gospel is the goal, but it's unconditional love like that, and acceptance that identifies us to the unbeliever and opens their closed hearts to the gospel. So, what are some practical steps we can take towards hospitality? Well, first of all, learn to engage strangers in conversation. It seems to kind of go without saying. Now, this doesn't have to be an intimidating, "Can I tell you about Jesus?" interaction. Just get used to conversing with strangers. We do it all the time. We'll share a knowing look or comment with a stranger next to us in a checkout line when we mutter to each other that they should open more registers, or quietly judge the parents of the kid who's having a meltdown in the next line. Or the ultimate stranger topic, the weather. It's a small step from that comment to a conversation. Just think of one more comment to continue the conversation And before you know it, you're not just making small talk, you're actually talking. Now, I do not share this particular point from a position of expertise by any means, but from a position of awareness. I see and know that this is necessary. I'm still learning it myself, but it takes practice. Just this very morning, the morning we're recording this video, I saw one of our Redemption Church members at the gym, and he said he wanted to introduce me to someone. He brought over a guy that I have seen in that gym many times, but I've never spoken to. The member introduced me to Mr. Jim, as he called him, and Jim talked about the talks that he and our member have had about life and spirituality and all kinds of things right there in the gym. This member just has that ability and that understanding to converse and connect with strangers. This is what I'm talking about. On this point, it would be helpful, I think, to refer back to one of Jason Pelletier's points from his class on one-on-one evangelism. Because as that story explains, this was missional living that Jason talked about, and how these conversations we're talking about can be very organically raised in the context of what he calls the rhythms of your life, just the normal activities you're already doing. How much easier would it be to initiate a conversation with a stranger about something you know you have in common because you're both in the same place doing it together on a regular basis? A stranger you've seen regularly the last 10 times you went to the gym or out running or a class you both take has the very thing you're doing in common with you already. That's a built-in guaranteed launching point for an organic exchange. Second, you need to maintain a margin in your schedule and in your finances, because hospitality and the generosity that naturally goes along with it is going to require extra time and financial investment. You must have time gaps into which to plug people and visits and conversations. You must have the resources with which to take people out, to be generous, or to host people for meals. Now, there is a caveat to this, because I can hear someone saying this, and this is what you cannot do. You cannot say, well, we can't be hospitable yet because we don't have the time or resources yet. But when we do, we're working on it. And boy, when we do, this place is going to be General Hospitable. See, that's funny because there was a soap opera called General. Okay. You can play that game for a long, long time. But more dangerously, the enemy can keep you thinking that way for a long, long time. There is a matter of faith and trust involved here. Who is in control of your time? And who are you giving over your finances to? Because if you're holding on to these areas with tight fists like this, you're not leaving room for God to do transformative work on you in those areas. So be wise and deliberate to try to create that financial space as best you can. But ultimately, it comes down to a matter of trust. It's just a matter sometimes of stepping out and doing it and trusting God to multiply your time and your resources. And third, pray for a heart of hospitality. So to pick up our story from the house in Madison, which we sold to move here to Roanoke, we closed on both houses on the same day, which was quite a crazy day. We closed on the house in Madison early in the morning with all of our necessities and our 3 dogs loaded in our go trailer, as we called it. And then we scooted up here to Roanoke to be at Panera in the afternoon to close on our Roanoke house. We had determined that when we got to the house with the key in hand, and it was officially ours, that we were going to stop on the doorstep and pray that God would use this house and us the way that he had in the Madison house. And we did that. We stopped on the front porch, we held hands, and we prayed that God would use us and use this house to bless people, to bring people in, to help us show hospitality and the gospel to people. Hospitality is not easy. It involves opening yourself up in ways that we often find uncomfortable. We naturally resist these things. But it's an absolutely necessary tool to make connections with people in a world where everyone assumes that you're out for yourself, that you have an agenda, that you have ulterior motives, and that you're really not just for them. They think that you just don't see them as individuals and valuable people, but you just want to use them in some way. And unfortunately, I believe that Christianity and the typical evangelism techniques of the past have kind of left that taste in a lot of people's mouths, and that it's legitimate. They're left feeling that they were an agenda or they were a checkbox. They just weren't truly valued for themselves. Hospitality, I believe, is an excellent doorway to open gospel conversations in the lives of the Rosaria Butterfields that are all around us in Roanoke. So let's use hospitality to help bring a restless culture to the redeeming Savior. Good evening and thank you.